Karen, the HOA president, loses her composure when I refuse to let her onto my property. I moved into my house a few months ago, eager to escape the chaos of apartment living and finally have some space to call my own. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where everyone keeps to themselves but still greets each other with a friendly smile. I wasn't thrilled about the idea of an HOA, but I knew it was part of the deal when buying here. The HOA president. Janet, however, was a different story. I'd heard rumors about her before I even signed the paperwork. Janet was one of those people who thought she had the right to enforce her will on everyone else. Her reputation was well known. She was that one neighbor who would nitpick the smallest details and believed every rule, no matter how petty, had to be followed to the letter. Still, I never thought I'd be on the receiving end of her wrath. Everything seemed fine at first, and I was doing my best to settle in. The yard had been neglected by the previous owner, so I started working on it right away, putting in a small garden, fixing the fence, and tidying up the place. I wasn't doing anything extravagant, just a little touch-up here and there to make it feel like home. Then, one afternoon as I was watering my new plants, I heard a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated for a second before answering. Standing there was Janet with her clipboard and a look on her face like she had something important to say. "Hello there," she said in her overly perky tone. "I'm Janet, president of the HOA, and I'm here for a quick inspection of your property." I blinked, unsure whether I'd heard her right. "Excuse me?" "Yeah," she continued, glancing past me toward my backyard. "I need to check your garden, the fence, and a few other things to make sure everything's up to code. It's part of the HOA rules, you know." I shook my head immediately, growing suspicious. "I'm sorry, but I'm not actually part of the HOA. I didn't sign up for that." She paused, looking me up and down like I'd just told her I was from another planet. "Well, you should be, but that doesn't matter right now. HOA members are responsible for maintaining community standards, and I have the right to inspect any property in the neighborhood." I felt my blood start to boil. "No, Janet, you don't. I'm not a member, and I'm not required to follow HOA rules. This is my property, and I'm asking you to leave." Her face immediately flushed with a mix of disbelief and anger. "You can't just refuse an inspection. What do you think this is, some sort of free-for-all? You need to comply." I stood my ground, folding my arms. "I don't have to do anything, and you don't have the authority to come onto my property without permission." Janet huffed, clicking her pen like she was taking notes. "Well, we'll see about that. I'll be back, and you won't be getting away with this." She spun on her heel and marched off, her high heels clacking loudly on the sidewalk. I watched her leave, a sense of unease creeping over me. I knew she wouldn't just let it go, but I didn't expect things to escalate this quickly. Still, I wasn't about to let her walk all over me, especially not when I had every legal right to deny her access. It didn't take long for Janet to make good on her threat. The next morning, I found a bright yellow violation notice taped to my front door. It listed supposed violations of HOA guidelines for my garden, specifically the placement of my new fence, and the size of some of the plants I'd put in. It even listed potential fines for non-compliance. The whole thing was laughable. I pulled the notice off the door and read it again, thinking maybe I'd missed something. Nope, it was just another power trip from Janet. I wasn't an HOA member, and I sure as hell wasn't going to start following some arbitrary rules just because she felt like it. I took a picture of the notice and forwarded it to my lawyer, just to be safe. My lawyer, Carl, was a no-nonsense guy who didn't tolerate any nonsense from people like Janet. He quickly reassured me that this was just a scare tactic. The HOA had no real authority over me, and Janet was clearly overstepping her bounds. A couple of days passed, and I thought that would be the end of it. I kept working on my garden and just ignored the threats. But then things started to get weird. I noticed Janet driving past my house more frequently, slowing down as she went by. The next time I was outside watering my plants, I saw her parked across the street taking pictures of my yard with her phone. She wasn't even being subtle about it. I waved at her, but she quickly turned her head and sped off. This woman was seriously starting to get on my nerves. I knew it was time to take action. I had the right to privacy, and there was no way I was going to let her turn my life into some HOA drama fest. I called Carl again and explained what had been happening. He advised me to install a security camera in my backyard to document anything that came up, just in case things escalated even further. I ordered the camera the same day. It was a simple setup. Nothing fancy, but it would give me a record if Janet ever tried to make any more moves. Of course, that wasn't the end of it. A few days later, Janet sent a letter demanding I attend an HOA meeting to discuss my violations and address the state of my property. The letter even threatened legal action if I failed to show up. It was clear she wasn't going to stop until I caved in, but I wasn't about to be intimidated. I decided to let her know exactly where I stood. Instead of just ignoring her letter, I wrote back. I made it clear that I had no legal obligation to attend any HOA meetings and that I would be filing a formal complaint if she continued to harass me. I also included the documentation of my previous interactions with her, including the violation notice and the photos of her taking pictures from across the street. I sent the letter off with a sense of satisfaction, but I knew Janet wouldn't back down that easily. She had crossed the line, and I was ready to make sure she knew she couldn't just do whatever she wanted. The next move was mine. I decided to take matters into my own hands and expose Janet's manipulative behavior to the entire HOA. I gathered all the evidence I'd collected so far, photos of the violation notices, copies of the letters, and a detailed timeline of every single encounter with Janet, and prepared to face her in person. The day of the meeting arrived, and I walked into the small community center determined to stand my ground. There were a few familiar faces in the room, but all eyes immediately fell on me when Janet stood up and started speaking. She went on and on about how my property was in disarray, how it violated HOA standards, and how I was causing a rift in the neighborhood, but I wasn't listening. I had my own statement prepared. I stood up calmly but firmly and addressed the room. I'm not part of this HOA, and I never agreed to follow any of its rules. The fact that Janet has been harassing me for weeks, violating my privacy, and even trespassing on my property is completely unacceptable. I have already contacted my lawyer, and I've been advised to pursue legal action if this behavior continues. The room fell silent. I could see Janet fuming, but I didn't care. I had the facts. I had the evidence, and I wasn't about to let her walk all over me. Then, as if on cue, Janet stood up, her face red with anger. "You have no idea what you're doing," she snapped. "You think you can just ignore the rules and get away with it? You'll regret this." I felt my stomach tighten. There was something in her voice, something that made me realize just how far she was willing to go. But I refused to back down. "I'm not the one who's been breaking the law, Janet. You're the one who's overstepping your bounds, and I won't let you intimidate me anymore." The room buzzed with murmurs as Janet's face twisted with rage. She shot me one last venomous look before storming out of the meeting, muttering threats under her breath. As the meeting wrapped up, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. Janet was still a threat, and I knew she wasn't going to give up easily, but I'd taken a major step in the right direction. I had set clear boundaries, and now I was ready for whatever came next. After the meeting, things quieted down a bit, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still yet to come. Janet had been humiliated in front of the HOA board, and I had no doubt she was furious. But at least I'd made it clear that I wasn't backing down. For the next week, I heard nothing from her. No letters, no visits, no strange cars parked outside. It was almost as if she had disappeared. I allowed myself to relax a little. Maybe I'd finally won. Maybe Janet had realized that pushing me any further would only lead to more trouble for her. Then one morning, I received a call from Carl. He sounded serious. "I don't want to alarm you, but I think you should come down to the office," he said. "There's been an update on your case." I could feel my stomach drop. "What's going on?" Carl hesitated. I think you need to be prepared for something bigger. The HOA has been trying to pressure me into dropping the case, and I think Janet might have some connections. I'm not saying anything illegal is going on, but there are people on that board who might not be playing by the rules." I didn't need to hear any more. I grabbed my jacket and headed straight for Carl's office. When I arrived, Carl laid out a stack of papers in front of me, documents from the HOA, emails, and even some internal memos that he had uncovered. The situation was far more complicated than I had imagined. Janet had been using her position as HOA president to manipulate the board, pressuring them to push residents into complying with her demands. It wasn't just about my property anymore. It was about her control over the neighborhood. One of the memos even revealed that Janet had been in contact with a local contractor about taking over property maintenance for the entire neighborhood, something that would give her a personal stake in all of the HOA's dealings. This was bigger than just some nosy neighbor trying to control my property. Janet was playing a game with much higher stakes, and if I didn't act fast, she would have the power to continue pushing people around, using her position to get whatever she wanted. But Carl wasn't ready to back down either. He had gathered all the evidence we needed to expose what Janet had been doing. We had enough to file a formal complaint against her, and with the right legal backing, we could make her leave her position and put an end to her reign of control over the neighborhood. It wasn't an easy decision, but I knew it was the only way forward. I had to fight back. I couldn't let Janet ruin my life or the lives of anyone else in that neighborhood who was too afraid to speak up. That afternoon, Carl and I filed the complaint. It wasn't long before the HOA board convened for a special meeting to address the issue. Janet was there, and I could see the panic in her eyes as the board members read through the evidence we had gathered. It wasn't just the violation notices or the trespassing. It was everything. The manipulation, the threats, the clear abuse of power. Janet tried to defend herself, of course, but her arguments fell flat. The board had no choice but to vote her out of the position of president. As soon as the vote passed, I could see the weight lift off my shoulders. Janet had lost. The relief was short-lived, though, as I knew this wasn't just about winning. It was about sending a message that no one should have the power to control and intimidate others without consequence. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. I didn't need to worry about her showing up on my property anymore, and I could continue living my life without fear of being bullied by someone who thought they could run the neighborhood. Janet had been forced out, and the HOA would now have to operate under the principles it was originally meant to: fairness, respect, and mutual understanding. The story didn't end there, though. I remained in touch with Carl to keep an eye on any possible retaliation from Janet. But for now, I was just happy that I had stood my ground. I stood up to a Karen, and in the end I came out on top. And as for Janet, well, she may have lost her position, but I have a feeling we hadn't heard the last of her. But next time I'd be more than ready.